There's something about working the night shift that changes the way you see the world. The hours stretch out, the silence grows heavier, and the darkness outside the windows feels like it's pressing in, waiting for you to make a mistake. Most people think of the night shift as boring, maybe a little lonely, but safe enough. I used to think that too, until the night I realized I wasn't alone. I'd been working at the old gas station on the edge of town for almost a year. It was the kind of place that never really closed, but after midnight the only customers were truckers passing through or the occasional local looking for cigarettes or coffee. My boss, Mr. Harlan, liked to joke that the only thing I had to worry about was falling asleep on the job. "Nothing ever happens out here," he'd say, handing me the keys at the start of my shift. "Just keep the coffee hot and the register locked." Most nights he was right. I'd bring a book or listen to music, watching the hours crawl by until the sun started to rise. The store was small, just 2 aisles of snacks and drinks, a counter with a register, and a back room where we kept the supplies. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the security cameras watched everything in grainy black and white. I always felt safe, cocooned in that little bubble of light, with the darkness held at bay by the glass doors and the hum of the cooler. But there was one night I'll never forget. It started like any other, quiet, uneventful, the clock ticking past midnight as I restocked the shelves and wiped down the counters. Around 1:30 a.m., a heavy rain started to fall, drumming against the roof and turning the parking lot into a shimmering black mirror. I watched the storm for a while, grateful for the distraction, then went back to my book. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping like fingernails on glass. I looked up, expecting to see a customer at the door, but the parking lot was empty. The tapping came again, a little louder this time, and I realized it was coming from the side window, the one that looked out over the dumpsters. I walked over, peering into the darkness, but all I could see was my own reflection staring back at me. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just a branch blown by the wind, and went back to the counter. But the feeling of unease lingered, a prickling at the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. I tried to focus on my book, but every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the building settling, the rain pounding on the roof. I kept glancing at the clock, willing the minutes to pass faster. The storm outside only seemed to grow worse, thunder rumbling in the distance and lightning flashing across the sky, briefly illuminating the empty lot. I tried to convince myself that I was just being jumpy, that the night was no different from any other. But the sense of being watched wouldn't leave me. Every time I looked up, I half expected to see someone standing outside just beyond the reach of the lights. Around 2:15 a.m., the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then came back on, but the security monitors behind the counter went dark for a few seconds before rebooting. I stared at the blank screens, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. When the cameras finally came back online, I scanned through each feed, looking for anything out of place. The parking lot was empty, the aisles were clear, and the back room was just as I'd left it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to distract myself by tidying up, stacking the magazines and straightening the candy bars. That's when I heard the tapping again, this time from the back door. It was softer than before, almost hesitant but unmistakable. I froze, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The back door was always locked, and no one ever used it except for deliveries during the day. I crept toward the back room, every step feeling heavier than the last. I stood in front of the door, holding my breath, listening. The tapping stopped. I waited, counting to 10, then 20, but there was only silence. I reached out and checked the lock, still secure. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything on the other side, but all I could make out was the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I turned to go back to the front, but as I stepped into the main store, I caught a glimpse of movement on the security monitor. Something had passed in front of the side window, a shadow, quick and low, gone before I could really see it. I stared at the screen, willing it to show me more, but the parking lot was empty again. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a stray animal, but the fear in my gut told me otherwise. I went back to the counter, trying to act normal, but every instinct was screaming at me to lock the doors and hide. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands shaking, and tried to steady my nerves. The store felt colder now, the lights harsher, the shadows deeper. I kept telling myself that morning would come soon, that I just had to make it a few more hours. I sat behind the counter, sipping my coffee and watching the monitors, my eyes darting from one grainy feed to the next. The storm outside raged on, wind howling around the building and rain lashing against the windows. Every so often, a flash of lightning would light up the parking lot, casting strange, shifting shadows across the asphalt. I tried to focus on the normal sounds of the store, the hum of the cooler, the soft buzz of the lights, but my mind kept drifting back to that shadow I'd seen, the tapping at the doors, the feeling that I wasn't alone. At 2:45 a.m., the bell above the front door chimed. I jumped, nearly spilling my coffee. I looked up, expecting to see a customer, but the door was still closed, the lot outside empty. The bell chimed again, softer this time, as if someone was gently pushing it from the other side. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the door. I peered out into the darkness, but there was no one there. The only thing I could see was the reflection of my own face, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at me. I checked the lock, still secure. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep into my skin. For a moment I thought I saw something move in the reflection, a shape, tall and thin, standing just behind me. I spun around, but the store was empty. The aisles were silent, the shelves undisturbed. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the fear wouldn't go away. I went back to the counter, glancing nervously at the monitors. That's when I noticed something strange. On the feed from the back room, the supply closet door was open. I was sure I'd closed it earlier in the night. I watched the screen, waiting for any sign of movement, but the closet stayed open, the darkness inside impenetrable. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I'd just forgotten to shut it all the way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from inside that closet. Something waiting for me to let my guard down. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the clock, willing the minutes to pass. But the store felt different now, heavier, colder, as if the darkness outside had seeped in through the cracks. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept telling myself that nothing ever happened out here, that I was safe, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Not tonight. I decided I couldn't just sit there and wait for something to happen. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and made my way toward the back room, every step echoing in the empty store. The supply closet door was still open, just as I'd seen on the monitor. I shined the light inside, half expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a stray cat that had somehow gotten in. But the closet was empty, just shelves lined with paper towels, cleaning supplies, and boxes of snacks. Still, the air inside felt colder, almost damp, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I closed the door firmly, making sure it latched, and turned to head back to the front. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It sounded like my name, carried on the air, coming from somewhere deep in the store. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, and listened. The whisper came again, a little louder this time, unmistakable. Someone or something was calling me. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, or maybe the storm playing tricks on my ears. But the fear was real, a cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I moved quickly back to the counter, locking the door to the back room behind me. I checked the monitors again, scanning each feed for any sign of movement. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from just out of sight. The minutes dragged by, each one slower than the last. I kept glancing at the clock, willing the sun to rise, but the night seemed endless. The storm outside finally began to let up, the rain slowing to a drizzle, but the sense of unease in the store only grew stronger. I tried to distract myself by counting the cash in the register, organizing the shelves, anything to keep my mind off the fear. But every time I turned my back, I felt eyes on me, cold and unblinking. At 3:30 a.m., the bell above the door chimed again. This time it was louder, more insistent, as if someone was trying to force their way inside. I rushed to the front, flashlight in hand, and peered out into the darkness. The parking lot was empty, but the glass was fogged with condensation, and for a split second I thought I saw a handprint pressed against the outside of the door. Long, thin fingers splayed wide, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. I stumbled back, heart racing, and locked the door tight. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew I didn't want to let it in. I backed away from the door, every instinct telling me to hide, to make myself as small and invisible as possible. I ducked behind the counter, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, and tried to steady my breathing. The store was silent except for the faint hum of the cooler and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I listened, straining to hear anything out of place. A footstep, a whisper, the sound of someone trying the door. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence, pressing in on me from all sides. I checked the monitors again, my hands shaking. The feeds showed nothing but empty aisles and a deserted parking lot. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. I thought about calling Mr. Harlan, or maybe the police, but what would I even say? That I was scared of a shadow, a whisper, a handprint that might have been nothing more than condensation. I knew how it would sound. I'd probably end up as the punchline to some joke about jumpy night clerks. So I stayed put, huddled behind the counter, watching the clock inch closer to dawn. Every so often I'd hear a faint noise, a creak from the back room, a soft tap at the window, but I forced myself not to investigate. I told myself that if I just stayed where I was, if I didn't open any doors or windows, I'd be safe. The fear was almost physical now, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke with a start to the sound of the bell chiming again. This time it was morning. The sky outside was pale and gray, the storm finally gone. I stood up, legs stiff and sore, and looked around the store. Everything was as it should be. The aisles neat, the doors locked, the supply closet still closed. But when I checked the front door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There on the glass was a single, perfect handprint. It was too large to be a child's, too slender to be a man's, and it was pressed so hard against the glass that I could see every line, every ridge. The print was cold to the touch, and as I stared at it, I realized that no matter how many times I cleaned the glass, it would always be there, in my memory, if not in reality. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that handprint, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, a smudge left by my own hand, anything but what I knew deep down it was. The fear from the night before lingered, heavy and cold, refusing to let go. I waited until the sun was fully up before unlocking the doors and stepping outside. The parking lot was empty, the world washed clean by the rain, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me, something that didn't belong. When Mr. Harlan arrived to relieve me, I tried to act normal. I handed over the keys, made a joke about the storm, and pretended I hadn't spent the night terrified out of my mind. But as I left, I glanced back at the store, half expecting to see a face in the window, a shadow moving in the aisles. There was nothing, just the morning sun glinting off the glass. Still, I knew I'd never forget what happened during those long, lonely hours. I didn't tell anyone about the whispers, the tapping, or the handprint. Who would believe me? It was easier to let it become just another strange story from the night shift, something to laugh about in the daylight. But every time I worked alone after that, I felt the same unease, the same sense of being watched. Sometimes late at night I'd catch a glimpse of movement on the monitors or hear a soft tap at the window. And I'd remember that I wasn't really alone. Over time, I learned to live with it. I kept the doors locked, the lights bright, and never ever opened the back door after midnight. But the memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder that the darkness holds secrets we're not meant to understand. And sometimes when the store is quiet and the world outside is nothing but shadows, I still hear my name whispered from the back room, soft and cold as the rain. If you ever find yourself working the night shift alone, remember this. Trust your instincts, keep the doors locked, and never ignore the feeling that you're not alone. Because sometimes you aren't.